Now back in this country, tracking of tainted food. Special correspondent Lee Hochberg has our science unit story.
Food contamination reports in the U.S. have been frequent.
New questions about food safety and beef.
And tragic in the last couple of years.
The outbreak has killed at least 8 and sickened another 500 people in 40
9 died and more than 700 were poisoned this winter when they ate salmonella-tainted peanut products. Almost 1,400 were sickened last year by tainted peppers. There were recalls for cookie dough, gravy sauces, cocoa mix, and that wasn't all that unusual. The CDC estimates 5,000 people with foodborne illnesses. What aggravates the problem is how long it takes the food industry and FDA to trace the source of tainted food. It took several months to track peanut products to the Peanut Corporation of America processing plant in Georgia, 3 months to find the origin of salmonella in the peppers. Tracking food from stores and restaurants back through the food chain of distributors, packers, truckers, processors, and to the farm is fraught with roadblocks and confusion. It's chaos, says Colorado Congresswoman Diana DeGette.
We don't have any uniform system of record keeping that both keeps track of the specific ingredients and where they started and where they ended up. It's just catch as catch can. Different people might have records in different boxes. It's almost like a scavenger hunt to try to find all of these records.
DeGette co-sponsored a bill to give the FDA, which regulates all food except meat and poultry, more enforcement power and require food suppliers to keep more detailed records. Fruits and vegetables from California farms are sorted through the night at Cook's Produce, a food distributor at San Francisco's produce market. Workers pack it for dawn delivery to groceries and restaurants.
Savoyed spinach is here, folks. It's right here.
Owner Rick Tombari is proud of his produce, but he says, if asked, he couldn't say exactly where it all comes from.
From looking at the box, it would seem like this was grown in Salinas, California, but actually it's shipped in season from Arizona and California. It really doesn't tell you very much as to where the product was grown.
And there isn't any other paperwork that accompanies this delivery that might tell you that?
Right now, what's on the invoice that comes from is the product of USA.
That's it,
That's
just
it.
USA. So if we needed to trace this back to the field...
Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it.
As a distributor, he's not required to keep records of such things. The law requires only processors, packers, and manufacturers to maintain lot-specific information. He says he doesn't know what he'd tell FDA inspectors about these onions he got from a broker in Mexico.
But where do these onions come from? Who grew them? What part of Mexico do they really come from? I couldn't tell you. Now, maybe a broker could tell you.
We dialed up the broker.
Do you know exactly where these are grown in Mexico, or is there a way I could find out?
Another call to the person the broker had bought from finally revealed the source.
It actually doesn't exist on paper.
Doesn't exist on paper.
Doesn't exist on paper. And he said that they're grown over the border in Tijuana and down towards Ensenada.
But there's no paper trail.
There's no paper trail
of where these onions come from.
Not that we're aware of.
In a recent study from the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, we're able to track only 5 of 40 food items from the grocery store back to the farm. Meredith Seif is Deputy Regional Inspector General.
Most facilities, 59%, weren't keeping the records they're supposed to keep, and we found that even when they were keeping what they were supposed to keep, that it was still not enough to ensure that the food supply was completely traceable.
Congresswoman DeGette's proposed food safety law, which has passed the U.S. House but awaits action in the Senate, would require FDA to develop rules for better record keeping. There is a model for this. Jim Nollmeyer is doing it voluntarily with his wheat crop near Spokane, Washington. Nollmeyer and nearby farms are separate from each other. Normally, everyone's wheat would go to a nearby milling plant and be mixed, so tracing it would be impossible. But Nollmeyer is part of Shepherd's Grain Cooperative, which markets its sustainable agriculture methods and promises customers they can tell how and where its farmers grew their grain.
So it came from this field, or this field.
Nollmeyer keeps detailed growing records.
I'm kind of proud of that, that I can do that I have those records, and if somebody wants to know, I can show them. Hand scribbled, but I can show them.
The American Farm Bureau argues requiring farmers to keep such detail is the wrong solution. It says contamination usually occurs later in the food chain, as in the case of the contaminated peanut products. The Farm Bureau's Kelly Ludlam.
The peanuts in that case coming off of the farm were perfectly safe. In no cases have there been any problems linked to the peanuts themselves. The salmonella that made people sick occurred in the processing plant. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense to trace every peanut and put tough new standards on producers that ultimately increase their cost of production.
Nollmeyer agrees there is a cost.
I would say I would have to add 5% anyway, probably $20,000 in management costs and in the time Barb puts in keeping all these things.
What I do is...
Barb is his wife, who keeps the records. She says, though, if any of their wheat was suspect, she could produce tracking data in a lick.
20 minutes.
That's all.
Yeah. Truly, because I know where it is and I know exactly what I'm looking for.
Author Michael Pollan, who wrote In Defense of Food, thinks tracing is a Band-Aid solution to a much larger problem.
Aunt Mabel's potato salad at the church supper, has been killing people for 100 years, but very, very few people because it was so decentralized. But once the equivalent of Aunt Mabel's potato salad is feeding 10, 20 million people in a week, all coming out of one processing facility, that's when the problem gets big. All these schemes for traceability are imperfect attempts to deal with the fact that the food chain is so long and we do not know who's preparing our food anymore.
But some consumers want to know now where their food comes from.
So I'm looking to, have healthy food. I just like the idea of being able to find out a little bit more about the food that I'm purchasing.
Dorothy Lawhead of Spokane was examining a traceability feature called Find the Farmer, promoted on the label of Stone Burr flour. That flour is made from the wheat we saw being carefully sorted in Spokane.
Yeah, there's a website on here, and somewhere there's a number on here that tells me how I can find out about this particular batch.
Stone Burr president Josh Dorff believes traceability is marketable.
Consumers are very interested. We've had thousands and thousands of unique visitors to the website that are tracing packages of their flour to learn a little bit more. They get to feel connected again to where food is coming from.
My name is Jim Nollmeyer, and I farm northeast of Reardon.
As consumers explore methods to track their food, Congress will be deciding how the FDA can assure better traceability as well. The Senate will debate the new food safety bill in the fall.
Next tonight, the early arrival of